Hey everyone, I'm Robbie Cornthwaite.
I'm Daniel Mullen.
I'm Angelo Costanzo.
I'm Marco Flores.
I'm Marcelo Garuska.
I'm Ian Fife.
This is Casio, and you're watching.
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 And you are watching
Purebred Reds, Adelaide United Fan TV.
G'day guys, and welcome to the Purebred Reds Adelaide United Fan TV. It's another special edition coming to you with a Adelaide United update, and I am very, very pleased to say that I'm joined by the Advertiser's Rob Greenwood, a man that is closest to the club than anyone else in the media. Rob, welcome back to the show.
No worries. Thanks very much for having me on again.
Now, Rob, a lot of people tend to think throughout the span of this whole pandemic that it's really the emergency workers who are most on the front lines and most affected. But people might forget a certain Rob Greenwood still has to run around and do his daily work. As a journalist, how has it affected you professionally and personally as well?
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm quite in the essential services category of some of our health workers, but thanks for that intro. Yeah, look, it hasn't been too bad. We've sort of been working from home for about the past 6 weeks or so. So it takes a little bit of sort of getting used to not going into the office every day, and a few more distractions around the home, like a 9-month-old daughter crawling around, which makes it interesting. But no, look, it's been pretty fine. Yeah, as journos, we're sort of out on the road quite a bit anyway. We work mobile, sort of on the run, I guess. Quite a lot of the time, regardless, with a mobile phone and a laptop. So yeah, look, it hasn't been too bad. Probably the biggest thing we've missed is just getting out to cover games primarily. But even just getting out in Adelaide United sense, getting out to Playford to sort of check out training sessions. Interview coaches and players face to face rather than just over the phone. The press conferences we go to before and after matches. So just not having that sort of face to face contact, I guess, with the club and the people around it has been a little bit tough. But even as we'll touch on in this show, despite no matches, there's still been quite a bit sort of happening around the club and the league. So there's certainly been enough for us to keep us busy.
Absolutely, Rob. Gertjan Verbeek, the big news item, obviously departing from the club officially. Now, you've probably been closest to the subject. I don't think any other journalist in the country has produced as many Gertjan Verbeek stories as you have throughout the time he's been the manager here in Adelaide. I guess not the most shocking revelation to some supporters, particularly given that he did go back to Holland a few weeks back. But how did this news sort of touch you? I mean, were you expecting it at all?
Yeah, as you say, look, I guess when any coach steps down, halfway through a 2-year contract like he was, I guess in some ways you don't always expect it initially. As you said, with this one, look, I think as soon as he returned back to the Netherlands, due to the coronavirus, it should be said, and the potential for sort of European borders to close and him wanting to get his wife and his young daughter back to their homeland. I think from most people's point of view, as soon as that happened, I think there was always question marks around whether he was going to come back, particularly, if and when this season picked up again and we finish off those last 5 or 6 rounds. So, the club initially insisted, look, the intent was he was going to come back. He was keen to come back. The club wanted him back again. But I think, the biggest thing, having sort of spoken to him, spoken to the club, spoken to some players, since April 1, the players and the coaching staff have been stood down without pay. So, I guess that's tough for everyone, but for someone that's, here from a country a long way away and relying on that wage to support his family, then I guess it gets pretty tough. So I think once that was the case, once we went back to the Netherlands, once the uncertainty about if and when the league would resume sort of continued and dragged on, I think all those factors combined, it was probably always going to end in this sort of situation. So, yeah, in some ways, not overly surprised. And I guess looking at recent results, maybe it was the right outcome both for Gertjan and for the club itself.
Very interesting. Rob, you interviewed Gertjan for an Advertiser exclusive. Just to get his take from things, which is important because he has gone. And obviously for those that may want to question the kind of, I guess, success that he had here, he's not really here to defend himself. So a great exclusive you put out. What were the major takeaways?
Yeah, it was certainly interesting. And I appreciated the fact that he made himself available. I think quite often when, particularly coaches leave and head back to their sort of another country and leave the club, it can often be a little bit tricky as a journalist to track them down. But look, as always in all my dealings with him, he was pretty honest and pretty open and pretty sort of frank in his opinions, as he was with most people, I think, throughout his year or so here. The biggest thing I probably took out of it was the fact that, I asked him pretty straight out. I said, look, if it wasn't for the coronavirus and all the uncertainty this has caused, would you be keen and would you want to stick around and complete the second year of your contract? And he said straight away he would. He said basically, just the uncertainty caused by that in terms of his career going forward, in terms of his wages going forward, the potential that even if he stuck around for another season, given the income streams of all clubs have been affected so much, the probability is that contracts for coaches and players are likely to be renegotiated. So everyone's going to be probably on less money because there's less money in the game. So he said all those factors were basically the contributors to him sort of finishing up. But look, he said he enjoyed his time here. He admitted there was certainly some challenges in terms of, I guess, the financial restraints of the club, maybe a lack of depth in the squad. He also said, obviously, the results were up and down. I think as anyone sort of knew, he was obviously proud of the FFA Cup win and some of those quality young players he'd brought into the team. But, he admitted himself that there'd been a couple of runs, obviously, the run sort of mid-season where there was a slump. The most recent slump before the suspension of play. So he said, look, it had been an up and down time, but he had nothing but really good things to say about the club, to the supporters of the club. Probably one of the biggest interesting things I took out of it was the fact that although he has left the club, and the club seems very likely that it's going to find obviously a new coach. When I asked him, he sort of didn't rule out one day returning to the club in the future. So he said, look, if further down the track, if the club owners reached out to him and said, hey, we've got an opportunity for you to come back under different circumstances, he sort of said he would certainly consider that. So not sure the club's going to go down that path again. But interesting to hear that he said that, and probably reflects the fact that overall he probably enjoyed the experience, I suppose.
Yeah, you would have noted that Pierre Van der Poel also acknowledged there's a slim possibility that the two parties might reunite sometime down the track. But it does really change the narrative to hear you say that he was keen to resume his time here and see out his contract at least if it wasn't for this pandemic. And I'm sure that may change the way a lot of people feel about how it may have been handled between both parties. So very interesting exclusive interview that you put out for the Advertiser, as I mentioned. Now, another one of your key stories that you've done in recent times, Rob, was an exclusive with Pablo Sanchez. We know that it was 4 years on Friday, just gone, from our 4-year anniversary of our maiden title win at Adelaide Oval against the Western Sydney Wanderers, a day that will live long in the memories of all supporters, unquestionably. Professionally and personally, because I'm sure you'll take on it from two different angles. What are your recollections from that day? Obviously, probably the most historic day in your lifetime of watching football, let alone as a journalist covering the sport here in South Australia.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I think every year when that anniversary rolls around, I think all of us get a bit misty-eyed, don't we? And we see the scenes of that packed Adelaide Oval and decked out in red, and even the weather was perfect. It was actually a good game of football for a grand final, and obviously the end result was fantastic. So I mean, firstly, from I guess a football fan point of view and someone who started out as an Adelaide United supporter, I mean, the day was just perfect. It wasn't from start to finish. And I guess when you look back also, where that team came from that season, winless in the first 8 rounds of the season, to go on to win the Premier's Plate from there, and then go all the way and win the title. It's just, it was just like a dream, the whole thing, and it just couldn't have played out any better in terms of the crowd and the atmosphere and the match itself. So certainly from a fan's hat sort of point of view, I think it was unbelievable. And I guess we just all hope and pray that we get to have a day like that sometime again in the not too distant future. From from a journalist point of view, I was lucky enough to be there working and covering the game for the Advertiser, and yeah, look, it was I think when you cover a game, you really have to take the fan hat off a little bit and try and stay professional and focused. But it was probably towards the end of that, I think, when Pablo Sanchez fired in that third goal, I think most of us in the press box with any sort of Adelaide background were on our feet and banging the glass and getting into it the way anyone was. So before sitting down and regaining composure and getting back to finishing up our report. But yeah, even from a coverage point of view, certainly one of the highlights of my career as a journalist. Even taking the result out of it, just covering an A-League grand final, where it was on such a grand stage, and the crowd was great, and despite all its issues as a real football venue, Adelaide Oval sort of came up pretty well that day for us.
Absolutely,
absolutely. One of my very fond memories, and I think the club has shared it on social media in the aftermath of the 4-year anniversary, was during the post-match press conference. We were sitting down there. Guillermo was there answering questions. Isaias was there as man of the match from memory.
Yeah.
About halfway through it, sort of hear like a bit of a noise at the door behind us where the changing room was, and through come the players with bottles of champagne and bottles of water. They're spraying them more. Isaias, the journalist, scrambling for cover as the champagne's flying everywhere. So that's definitely one of my favourite moments. And you'll be happy to know that the main player, I'm not sure he instigated it, but the main player that was right at the front of the door with the champagne was none other than Bruce Jitto, the Parrot football director. So there you go. So I'm not sure it was his idea, but no, it was a really fond memory. Just a nice little way to cap it. It was a pretty special day and night for everyone.
For sure, mate. Momentous stuff. Did you get soaked at all?
I did a little bit, yeah, I did. And most of our sort of laptops there and phones there and stuff. So I think everyone was kind of stressing that, they weren't going to be able to file their last report because their laptop got drenched in champagne. But no, it was all good fun. So
Rob, like I mentioned before, you did an exclusive with Pablo Sanchez, just touching on his memories from that day. Obviously a fan favourite. We know the narrative of basically the fact that when he scored, everyone just collectively breathed a sigh of relief and knew that at that moment we'd won our maiden title. What did Pablo touch on in his exclusive with you?
Yeah, it was fantastic. As you say, what's the old saying? They say sort of don't meet your heroes because, you'll always be disappointed. But the way Pablo comes across on the pitch, that honesty and that passion he has, and that unbelievable relationship he built with Adelaide United fans. Speaking to him, over the phone, he's obviously back in Spain now. Just a fantastic guy, very, very passionate character. Can still tell you everything from not only that grand final win from that entire season, the games he scored goals in, how early or late in the games they won, they lost. He just absolutely loved every second of those 2 years he had here at the club. And that passion shines through. I think it was supposed to be, a 10 or 15 minute interview, and I think it went for closer to 40 or 45 minutes.
Wow.
Once we got talking. So it was just it was just unreal. And as I say, his love and admiration for the club, which is obviously reflected in the sort of love that supporters had for him, is as strong now as I think it was 4 years ago. I think obviously his biggest regret, and he made it quite clear, I think he did at the time too, was the fact that he didn't get a new contract to stick around longer. I think at the time he was about 32, 33. I think the argument was, you can't have an import player who's 32, 33, commanding a big wage and coming off the bench. But the thing was, even coming off the bench, I think he scored 5 in the last 7 games of that season. In his 2 seasons at the club, he scored, I think it was 17 goals. And in that time, I think he started 26 games, which is pretty incredible. So for me, his impact and his quality as a player and just what he brought, whether he was on the pitch for 2 minutes or 20 minutes or 90 minutes, he just had that rare ingredient as a player, didn't he, to come on and just always have a huge impact. And it was almost like from a supporter's point of view, as soon as he walked on the pitch, the supporters got a lift as well because they knew this guy was going to do it. So, I think that was his biggest regret, was not getting at least one more season. The interesting thing for anyone who hasn't sort of read the story was he's actually now a coach, an assistant coach in Spain, and sort of studying for his qualifications. And he actually said his ambition as a coach is to come back to Adelaide one day and coach Adelaide United. So I'm sure he'd be sort of welcome with open arms back here in any capacity. Whether it leads to that, who knows? So that's his long-term ambition. So I guess we'll watch this space and see what happens.
I'm sure we'd all love to see a coaching bench of him, Eugene Galekovic and Isaias sometime soon down the line.
Absolutely.
Great stuff, Rob. We're going to move on and take our supporter hats off. So you did an article very recently, which was basically an update with Nathan Kuzmina, who touched on the fact that he doesn't think there's going to be an issue at the club pertaining to the expiring contracts of our players throughout this holding pattern that the coronavirus has put us in. Can you elaborate on what exactly Nathan had to say about the immediate future surrounding expiring contracts for players?
It's certainly a bit of an interesting one, and I think this is an issue that's not just affecting Adelaide United or the A-League. It's football competitions worldwide, from the English Premier League, Serie A, wherever, any of these competitions that are potentially going to restart and try and finish off the season. Most football contracts are sort of dated to the end of May. So usually by then, seasons have completely finished, whether that's in Europe or in Australia, wherever. Contract runs down end of June. Players that are out of contract are obviously free to look at other options or move to other clubs. Obviously, the interesting situation is here. We're obviously approaching that deadline of the end of May, and seasons haven't even restarted yet. It's looking like they're going to. So every chance is that they're going to restart around or even after those contracts expire, which creates, I guess, a bit of an unprecedented situation in that you're potentially going to have uncontracted players still playing for clubs they're no longer contracted to. So my understanding is, and speaking to Nathan, he says, look, FIFA have given permission to the FFA to at least look at temporary extensions of these contracts. So if the league, say, was to restart in July or August, then players normally out of contract end of May would be able to play on for the remainder of the season. That's still up in the air as far as I know. It hasn't been confirmed by FFA how they're going to approach it. But the word from Nathan and from the club was basically that out of all the clubs, they should be in a pretty good position, even in worst case scenario. So worst case scenario, if FFA says contracts finish at the end of May, they're not going to be extended. So uncontracted players, I guess, are free to look at other options. Then the Reds sort of feel they're in a pretty good position. They've only got, I'll say only, but they've got 5 players whose contracts are due to expire at the end of May. When you take into consideration, one of them is Chen, obviously the Chinese import, who hasn't sort of got near to a first team game yet. One of the others is Mirko Boland, who's already agreed to join, I think, a third-tier club in Germany.
Correct.
He obviously has barely played this season. And 2 of the other imports in Christian Opseth and Michael Jakobsen are 2 of the other ones. So Jakobsen was obviously a pretty key player as captain, but again, Opseth, you could argue, his impact due to injuries has been pretty minimal. The only non-import contracts due to expire is George Blackwood. So again, he's a player that, again, he has had some injuries, would be a handy player to have around. But again, if contracts expire and he's not there, well, I guess he's not there. I think across the league, it's more than half of the players at all clubs, contracts are expiring. So if you take that into account, if those players aren't going to be at clubs, then there are going to be some pretty different looking squads heading into the resumption of the season or even into next season. So the interesting one as well is a lot of these players under contract in Michael Maria. I've heard some whispers that given Verbeek's not coming back, that Maria might also not be coming back to the club as well, although he does have another year left in his contract. So I would say, I think we're touching on this a little bit later in terms of the potential resumption of the league, but I wouldn't be surprised if and when the league gets up and running again, at least probably 4 of those 5 imports might not be part of Adelaide United squad due to the contract situation or due to sort of having travelled back to the homeland and not being able to get back in the country. But the Reds certainly won't be alone in that sort of aspect.
Very, very interesting, Rob. And just on Jakobsen, he is 34. So given that we're pretty thin with our centre halves, it would be a big call whether they should extend his contract or not. But good to hear that thanks to being proactive, we are in a better position than most contractually, which is, I guess, a bit of a relief in the scheme of things. We're going to move on, Rob. So Football South Australia, as they're now called, did release their staged resumption of training statement last Friday, which is unrelated news. Do you think this can run smoothly at all? Like, obviously, there's a lot for the clubs to kind of make sure that they adhere to, and everyone's going to be a guinea pig to begin with. Is it right that they sort of let clubs resume training at this point in time, given that we're not over the hump yet? And do you think it can run smoothly from what you've heard?
Yeah, it's certainly another interesting one. I know, again, in terms of world football, this sort of debate is dividing opinion. Obviously, based on the very sort of serious health concerns that have been a huge component sort of right across the board, and have obviously led to the suspension of pretty much every league worldwide. May 11 is the date that FSA have sort of released to say clubs can start looking at resuming training from then onwards. There is some restrictions around that. I've looked into it a little bit over the past few days. The federal government have actually, in conjunction with the AIS, released some guidelines in terms of return to sport across the board, across all sports, with some guidelines around returning to training, then gradually returning to matches. So the ones that relate to the return to training of local clubs here are basically training will still be restricted to groups of 10 or less, including coaches. And basically training will be limited to sort of maybe some fitness work, skill-based work, but no contact work, no small-sided games, no tackling, no sort of physical contact, basically. So it is a staged return to training, I guess, to try and minimise that risk. Also in there, a couple of sort of interesting factors as well was the idea that players should basically be arriving at training in their kit, ready to train. So no sort of loitering around change rooms before or after. And I think it's even said in there the fact, which makes sense, that players should be showering at home before and after training.
Yeah.
So I think the line in there was something that basically get in, train and get out, which again makes sense in terms of hopefully lessening the risk of any infection or transmission of any diseases, I guess. So look, I think it's, having spoken to some local clubs, I think it's a very welcome boost. They're all obviously doing it pretty tough. They played sort of 4 games of the season. They built up to for sort of 3 or 4 months of a long pre-season, and then things were sort of called off as they were everywhere else. So they've been doing it pretty tough. I know in terms of sponsorship revenue is down for clubs because a lot of businesses are struggling. Clubs are obviously not getting the match day revenue through the gate or over the bar or canteen or whatever. So a lot of their usual income sources have pretty much dried up. So I think the return to training and hopefully after that a return to matches again, if they can, within a month or 2 after that, has been welcomed by clubs. And, I think and hope if clubs adhere to those restrictions and do the right thing, then hopefully I think it should go smoothly and be a good outcome for everyone.
Yeah, wow. It's going to be very interesting to see how the clubs roll this out, particularly given there's no template to really refer to. So everyone's in the dark with it, but it'll be weird to see this happen. Sticking to matters relating to Football South Australia, Rob, you wrote an article which basically touched on the fact that they're considering a range of cost-cutting modules to apply homogeneously across our top 3 tiers here in South Australia. What's going on there exactly? What are they tossing up?
So basically, it was a meeting of clubs. So my understanding is Football SA was aware of the meeting. It wasn't actually part of the meeting. So it was basically an independently called meeting for the clubs in the NPL, SA, State League 1 and State League 2. So I guess it's effectively the top 3 divisions of football here in South Australia. Basically to the meetings, the video meetings, I think they've had about 2 or 3 of them, were basically to discuss cost-cutting measures, obviously, as we spoke about before, in relation to coronavirus, the drying up of revenue streams, how clubs are going to survive if and when they get back on the pitch again. One of the main talking points that has come out of it is the idea of a reduction of player wages or match payments across the league, which obviously have risen quite sharply in recent years by all accounts, and is a pretty big cost for local clubs. Given a lot of those player wages are generally paid sort of via club sponsorship and via those revenue streams coming in. Without those revenue streams, clubs are basically saying, look, we can't afford to. We used to pay this player $600, $800 a week to play. We can't afford that anymore going forward. So I think clubs are trying to come to some sort of agreement across the league in a united front to say, we're going to reduce all our player contracts by X percent, 40%, 50%, whatever. Get everyone to agree to that, present that to Football SA, and that be the way forward so clubs can hopefully survive in these pretty tough economic times. My understanding is that most of the clubs, the 36 clubs, are on board with it, are keen. I think there might be one or two clubs that have a slightly different take on things. But from what I'm hearing and what I've seen, I think it's a direction that clubs are pretty keen to take. I think it will certainly happen, and I think it's a sensible outcome. I know for some players rely on their match payments probably as a secondary income, but if you look across the board, across any sport, we're looking at huge cuts across any walk of life. People are losing their jobs or renegotiating their pays or having their hours or days of work lowered. So I think it's pretty unrealistic to expect that local football would be immune to that. And look, I just think it's a logical step and something that I think is going to happen.
Yeah, I think there's an appetite for this to happen within the football community here, Rob, because we did have Mark Rosali come out recently, the former Croydon Kings head coach, and he said, basically, we're paying players now at a premium when we're not really getting many people through the gates at a local level to justify what we're paying them. And when you compare that to a second tier semi-professional level like the SANFL, where there's, sometimes up to 5,000 people at a game, it just doesn't justify what players are earning at a local level. So this could change things for the long term. We'll have to wait and see, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly speaking to some clubs, they've sort of said, look, obviously the coronavirus has been a horrible thing, and not just within sport, obviously within society, far more serious than sport, the ramifications. But they've actually said it could be a bit of a blessing in disguise in terms of the long-term sustainability of these local competitions, of these local clubs who are scraping by almost on a week-to-week basis sometimes just to try and pay these players. And I think they sort of feel that if across the board, everyone takes a step back and says, look, as local clubs, as you said, with not huge crowds coming through the gate, we can't afford to pay these wages anymore. Then players have to accept that's sort of part of playing football going forward, and everyone's on the same page. Then it could actually be a step in the right direction for the game going forward, I think.
Yeah, very well said, Rob. We're going to move back on to matters pertaining to Adelaide United. Now, we've had various people come out and sort of tell us who they think should take the job of head coach at the club. I think it's pretty clear that we will go with an Australian. Who do you think is considered a likely candidate to replace Gertjan Verbeek in the Hindmarsh hot seat?
Well, I certainly agree. I think it will be an Australian coach, having sort of spoken to the club, and also you say Pete Vanderpool's comments the other day made that pretty clear. I think also I wouldn't be surprised if it's not just an Australian coach, a South Australian coach, or at least a coach who has played or coached large chunks of their career here in South Australia, which I think is a smart approach. I mean, the philosophy of the club now, in terms of a playing point of view, is really to have as many South Australian homegrown talents in the squad as they can, both in terms of bringing those talented young players through the youth ranks and blooding them in the first team, like the Toure brothers this season, or Louis Dorigo, three really good examples of that, but also bringing South Australian players back from overseas or interstate clubs, James Troisi, Riley McGree coming back. So I think that South Australian focus, which most fans, I think
there's a real flavour for it.
Absolutely. So I think, if that's the approach of players, then why not go for a similar approach when appointing your new coach? So I think it will be someone with a very strong South Australian link. In terms of names, I've probably got 3 or 4 that I would sort of throw in the mix, and they're probably fairly obvious ones. I think the easy option or the obvious approach would be, I guess, to promote Carl Veart into the sort of senior role, at least for, the conclusion of this season, the last 5 games, and hopefully a finals campaign. Given, Carl has already been at the club this year, he's worked under Gertjan, he have a close relationship with all the players. In terms of his playing career, he was obviously an Adelaide United great, and I think he would have the respect and admiration of the fans instantly, and also the players. I think they're all very fond of him, having spoken to the players. So I think that would be a sensible choice. Probably not a surprising choice, at least for the rest of this season. In terms of a couple of other names, I like the sort of sound of. One is Tony Vidmar. He's obviously been out of the state for a while, but obviously born and bred here in South Australia, an Adelaide City club legend, achieved everything, at a club level here, both in Australia and in Europe. Obviously represented the Socceroos for a large number of years. Has some coaching experience and some assistant coach experience. So I think he's one that would be a pretty strong candidate. And the other name that probably would be my personal favourite is Joe Mullen. Joe, again, a legend of SA football. Again, came through Adelaide City, won everything possible there, represented his country, and has since been just an incredible coach at local NPL level. Has coached in Victoria a little bit over there and had some success. But obviously in recent years, his achievements with Campbelltown City have just been incredible. And again, working pretty closely with Joe and speaking to him, I couldn't sort of vouch more highly for his character, his knowledge of the game, his passion for the game, also his passion for South Australian football in particular. And those teams he produced out there at Campbelltown, sitting watching them play was fantastic. They went on to win not only state NPL titles, but a national NPL title, which compared to some of the resources at interstate NPL clubs is a pretty massive achievement for a South Australian side. So, look, I would love to see Joe be given the opportunity. He hasn't really coached at that professional level, so I guess that would be the one question mark. But I think anyone that's worked with him at a local level would vouch for his credentials. And again, I think from a supporter's point of view, I think he's someone that fans would instantly warm to and would back in. And I think he would get and earn the respect of his players pretty quickly too.
Yeah, I'm completely with you, Rob. I've been championing the cause of Joe Mullen for a while now. And it's also very interesting to hear that Carl Veart may be installed not only with caretaker objectives, but possibly there might be a bit of a audition there to take the top job, which may skim over some people's minds when compiling their personal lists of who they'd like to see take over. We're going to press forward. We're still in the dark about a lot of things relating to how this season is going to finish. We know it does need to finish, but other than the announcement the other day that Fox Sports had belatedly paid the instalment to FFA that was due, we really don't know how exactly they're going to conform to some kind of structure to see this league finished. We did get a report today out of FTBL, which is formerly 442, that Wellington Phoenix have been told to prepare for an August start date for the recommencement of the league. And they've been advised to base themselves in New South Wales for a 2-week quarantine period. This is according to Wellington's general manager, David Dome. And apparently all games will be played in Sydney, mirroring the hub-style format. Rumours that have been circulating for 6 weeks now. Are we to bank on this being the plan, Rob? Could you see it unfolding in any other way or ways?
Well, at this stage, yeah, there's been nothing concrete has come out of FFA around those timeframes, and certainly my questions to the club in recent days, they haven't sort of confirmed anything, I guess, on the record. My sort of personal understanding from the piece I've heard sort of outside those official sources is that they're looking at a July 1 return to training, I believe. Given clubs across the board basically haven't been training for the past couple of months, and then flowing on from that, all being well, an early August resumption of the league. Now, I can't sort of stress enough the fact that they're not sort of concrete dates I've been given. I've had confirmed by the club or FFA, just from various sources around the traps. That seems to be at least what they're working towards. As a bit of a plan forward. So, look, I think from a fan's point of view, I think having any dates or anything to cling to and even a journalist point of view is a positive. As you say, everyone's been very much in the dark in recent months as to if and when this league might actually resume again. So I think having that, it gives everyone a bit of a glimmer of hope, and also from a player's point of view, these guys haven't been training; they've been doing workouts in their backyard and kicking the ball in their backyard like they're sort of kids again, going for runs. But speaking to players again, they're just so dying to get back to training and get back to matches again. So look, fingers crossed, we're looking at something like that. Whether it plays out in the sort of the one city hub scenario, again, that's a little bit up in the air. Certainly the comments from Wellington today would suggest that is closer to a reality. I know it's something that has been floated between clubs and by FFA previously during this whole scenario. So if the one city hub was to happen, you would think logically Sydney would be the location for it, given that New South Wales has the highest number of teams.
Yep.
It would also probably mean logically you would think it would be played out in a condensed amount of time. I think we've got Adelaide United has 5 matches left and there's 6 rounds of the competition before finals. So you could very easily see, I think, those 6 rounds condensed into maybe a 3-week period, clubs playing every sort of 3 or so days to get through those fixtures in the one city, and then obviously probably also a condensed finals series beyond that. So, look, certainly I would take it as a positive, the fact that, there is something hopefully for supporters and fans to look forward to. And, fingers crossed we get some confirmation of that in the coming days.
Yeah, first and foremost, we do have to get to the other side of this season. But once we get there, Rob, how might next season play out? Because obviously we do know we have a massive advantage in, suddenly I should clarify, we have a massive advantage in this massive off-season, which is generally obviously very unpopular with everyone, but it might come to our aid in this situation. But if we have a season finishing around the end of August, but potentially even in early September, could that have any ramifications going forward with how the start of next season might look? Obviously, it's going to be very different without an FFA Cup in there as well, which presumably will not be there. I mean, obviously no one can have a definitive answer, but do you have any foresight into how it might look going forward for the A-League?
I think, again, we've spoken how a lot of these issues and these sort of question marks don't just affect the A-League, they affect any league across the world that's still looking to sort of conclude the season. So again, I think it falls into that category. It's very hard to say with any certainty that, the 2020/21 season is going to be played, like X, Y, and Z, when we don't know yet if and when this season is going to be completed. So I think once we know, for sure, this season is going to kick off at the start of August and finish, as you say, maybe at the end of August, then I think we can start looking towards how next season might appear. Again, there has been a few whispers about if this season takes longer to play out and pushes on maybe later into September or even October, who knows? The fact that next season might be a condensed format with less rounds, maybe teams only playing each other once or twice, and a finals campaign, that has been floated as a possibility. So I wouldn't be surprised if next A-League season looks different in terms of maybe length or how it rolls out to what we're used to. As touched on before, I also think in terms of A-League squads, I think they're going to look very different for both the completion of this season and even the resumption of next season in terms of foreign players and foreign coaches potentially probably not being there. How that next season will play out, I think it's a very hard one to say, but I think it might be a little bit different to what we're used to. That's pretty safe to say.
Rob Greenwood, advertiser, journalist, and with his ear closer to the club than anyone else, it's been highly, highly valuable to get your insights on everything that's been happening throughout this extraordinary time. Make sure that you do keep tabs on the Advertiser Sport, and Rob Greenwood, your page that you've got up on your socials there, Rob Greenwood Sports Writer, very much covering Adelaide United more than anyone. So, make sure you get around that. Rob, it's been great having you on. Stay safe, and we'll touch base again soon. It's been great getting you on the show again.
No worries at all, mate. Thank you for having me on, and likewise, stay safe yourself, and to all the Red supporters out there, take care and keep well. And fingers crossed in the not too distant future, we've got some real football and some on-pitch action to talk about.
Beautiful. Thank you for watching, guys.